Hi, I'm Whitney Sheridan from the School of Public Policy at Penn State. I'll be speaking with you about strategies for career and leadership success with our Director of Professional Development and Student Engagement, Catherine Baumgardner. Before we get started with today's topic, advice from the field, feedback from recruitment and hiring managers, I want to encourage you to participate today and invite you to type your questions in the Q&A box at any time throughout the discussion. To help us gather the inside scoop from those who do the hiring and recruiting, we have called on a special guest to join us. Christian Marrone is the Vice President for Civil and Regulatory Affairs at Lockheed Martin. He has nearly 20 years of experience in government administration, spanning multiple presidential administrations, government agencies, and the private sector. He's also a proud Penn State alum and former football player who was part of the 1995 Big Ten and Rose Bowl championship team. Christian, thanks so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thanks. My pleasure. It's an exciting day at Penn State, given the news this morning. So I got an extra pep in my step and look forward to our discussion. So we got something to look forward to now with Penn State football coming back.
That's right. That's right.
Great. Well, Christian, we are absolutely thrilled to have you with us today. And last month, we talked about the basics of best practices for resumes, cover letters, and interviews. But today, it's going to be fun to put you on the hot seat a little bit to ask you what it looks like, what you look for when recruiting for members of your team. And I want the audience to listen very carefully for some of the things you may already be doing well and some things you should continue doing or need to improve based on what you hear from Christian today. So I'd like to kick us off by asking you first, what do you look for in a cover letter and a resume? What do you need to see on paper to move a person to the interview process?
So first, you got to have the basic, the skills have to match your experience and skills, or at least your education need to match kind of what we're looking for. But beyond that, though, the thing I always look for are kind of the intangibles that are not, kind of reading between the lines. To me, everything we do requires teamwork. It requires folks to work with one another in team settings. Very, very few get to actually work independently on their own. And so looking at whether or not a person has played a team sport or has done something in kind of a team-oriented setting, and those experiences are brought out in the cover letter, kind of that story that's told is really important to me. And those really differentiate well beyond where you went to school. It's looking at the kind of things that you've done outside of just school, or I think are really kind of set folks apart. The idea that because you went to Harvard or wherever, that, as far as I'm concerned, that's nice. You spend a lot of money on your education and appreciate that. But really, I'm looking for how are you going to fit within our culture and the team that that I have. And so those are the kind of intangibles you look for, really.
Tell us a little bit more. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Whitney. Go ahead.
I know team is really important to you, Christian. You've talked to us about that before. So talk a little bit more about how you pick that part out of it.
Yeah, I mean, so there you can, because of my experiences and, I think the experiences that others have had, being a part of a team, there's nothing that I do, there's nothing that any of the folks on my team or any of my colleagues do. I don't care where you are in the company or even in the government. There's very few things that you do that you're just doing it by yourself. And so how you mesh with the team and how you fit within that. So if you played a team sport or you've been a part of a group, that to me is just so fundamental, because it's really a tell in terms of whether or not you're going to be able to fit and really work well, not only with others, but really thrive in the organization. So it's just one of those things. And maybe I have a bit of a bias being an former offensive lineman. You're the unsung hero. It's the five of us working together. But, being in work is not much different. You know, when you're in whether it's a corporation or, like I said, in a government agency, you know, it is all about working well with one another. And I find that I've come across a lot of smart people, come from all kinds of backgrounds, some really great resumes on paper, but they just don't mesh well. And so you're always looking for those intangibles, because instinctively, you know, that when push comes to shove and work has to get done, those are the people who are going to be able to really survive and thrive. And because everybody you hire, ultimately, you don't hire them just for the position that you have. You want to hire them into the organization so that they have a long career in the organization. You want them to be successful. And if it means going to another company or somewhere else, that's fine. But you want to help somebody grow. And I find that those are that's the key intangible, really, in my experience thus far.
Yeah, and so much of what is recommended in resumes is to be sure to use keywords and outcome-based language, but I'm hearing you say that also team-based language is really important. Oh. Otherwise, the resume won't get through your screening process. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, you want to be action-oriented. You want to use action words, and clearly, you know, you also don't want to have any misspellings or just grammatical errors. I mean, those are red flags. You can take a pause on those. But outside of the kind of the fundamentals, yeah, you're looking for what's going to differentiate, because you do get a lot of really good candidates. I mean, I had a position open a couple months ago. I got over 30 candidates for the position, all, you know, really high end, you know, on paper. And so how do we sift through it? We were looking for who has the kind of the things that don't necessarily, you know, when you talk to them, it'll show up more, but you kind of got to know what you're looking for on that. So I think drawing those things out, you know, how you've overcome adversity, you know, talking about yourself in a personal way, not bragging. There's a difference, but just talking about things that you've done and how you've overcome. And, you know, I think those are powerful things that you can do that will really help differentiate, you know, you from someone else. And I think they make a difference.
So that key is obviously differentiation. So you've said spelling errors, grammatical errors might be an automatic rejection of a cover letter or resume. And I would agree with you totally. If someone isn't that detail oriented to make sure that the resume and cover letter are specific, they're probably going to work the same way. What are some of the other things that are automatic rejections for you? And the other thing I'm curious about, there are often different recommendations with respect to cover letters. Some sites specifically say resume only. Some expect a cover letter. What's your general advice to our listeners about cover letters? Do you like them? Do you expect them? What do you want to see in them?
Or do you maybe not even look at someone's resume or package if they don't submit a cover letter, for instance?
So cover letters are, you know, kind of a mixed bag, because if you're not a good writer, and it's not required, don't do one.
Interesting.
They are really helpful, though, because one of the key skills that I know I look for that is in such demand, and we have a team of 200 people that I manage, you know, former general flag officers. I mean, very accomplished folks, but very few of them know how to write, you know, or they write in like kind of jargon. It's just like, so the cover letter to me is a good writing sample. Normally I don't ask for writing samples because, you know, I really want to meet the person at the end of the day. But the cover letter is your initial writing sample. And if you can demonstrate, if you write really well in that cover letter, if it's well done, that will stand out with no question. So that's a good indicator as a potential, you know, for a potential candidate. I'll say the flip side of that, though, is if you can't write, or you're not a good writer, and your cover letter is disjointed and just kind of all over the place, that you won't even make it past, you won't make, no, it won't even get to me. It just will be flat out rejected. So, you got to be careful. So if they require it and you're a really good writer, I think it's, take the time and use that opportunity, take it as an opportunity. If it's not, and you're not a good writer, don't do it. Let your resume then speak for itself. And every resume, I'll tell you, you should have at the top of your resume kind of what your career objectives are and who you are. And very concise, short, concise, to the point, action, verbiage at the top. It's something that was recommended to me early on and I used, so I have a descriptor of who I am and what I aspire to do. Particularly when I was earlier in my career, it was really helpful. So every resume should have, because normally you just get the resume and it kind of lists, and particularly if you're coming out of college, you're not going to have a ton of experience. You're going to have some internships possibly and some other things. And so to give it more weight and to give someone a better indication of who you are, it's best to have that little paragraph at the top. And
I'm so glad that you
I'll say the
mentioned
other
that.
thing is no one in college, coming out of college or even graduate school, should have more than 2 pages max. I've gotten ones that are like 4 pages with like all these accomplishments in high school. I'm like, that's great, but I don't care. So
I'm so glad you're mentioning this, because these are questions that we get a lot, that students ask a lot. And we were talking about this during our last webinar last month about the question of an objective or goal statement. And there's some conflicting advice on that from a lot of, people in career positions of whether or not to do that. So it's good to hear that someone in your position looks for that.
I approach it in a way, one, it worked for me, so I can give you that advice. 2, every person I hire, particularly younger folks that I hire, I'm always looking to mentor them and to help them along, knowing that when they're working for me, there's only going to be limited opportunities potentially, but I want to help them move beyond where they are, find out what they really want to do and help them get there. I have 2 business analysts now that are on the younger side, both female, both very smart, highly driven. I don't want, the kind of the older one, the one who's been there the longer, Charlotte, I don't want her to, her stated goal is in 2 years, you better not be working for me. I will have failed you and you will have failed me if in 2 years you're still working for me. So for me, I was mentored. I was so fortunate every step along the way. I always had someone much more senior mentoring me and really helping me along. And so I take that opportunity to do the same. Obviously, you gotta want that. So having that, it's really helpful to me to know like you actually have thought about what you want to do with your life and your career. This is not just a job. This is gonna, where does this fit in kind of the larger, puzzle of your career? Because knowing that whatever you say today, 20 years from now, it will never have come true, because just life takes you in all kinds of directions. And if I told you what I thought I was going to be doing and what I'm doing now, they're a little further apart than what I like to admit. So
that's right. I want to remind all of our attendees that we want to encourage your questions throughout the discussion. So at any point, please remember, use that Q&A window and ask your questions. We have Christian here, and he is here to offer his advice on feedback as a recruiting and hiring manager with years of experience and willing to answer those questions. But we have several also here as backup. But anytime that Q&A window is here for you. Christian, as we move on, we want to get to some questions about interviewing and some about networking, but I wanted to ask you, as you're moving through the process and maybe going through the resumes, how much investigation do you do about a candidate prior to bringing them in for an interview? That social media snooping, how much of that goes on actually?
Actually, I try not to do any of it because
Okay. Fair enough.
I don't, what if folks went on my Twitter account, they would find I'm a sneaker guy, right? I have this big sneaker collection. It's just something I grew up, you know, idolizing Michael Jordan and Bo Jackson. And so, you know, when I had the opportunity, I had something. So if you went on my Twitter account, you'll find, you know, all kinds of things about sneakers. And if you went on my Facebook account, yeah, and if you went on my Facebook account, you'd find everything about Joe Paterno and Penn State football and all. I don't talk about politics or those kind of things. Quite frankly, I'm not interested in your political views or those types of things. To me, actually, I like having diversity of thought, and also I don't bother going through that stuff, to be, you know, it's just not my time. Other people may, you know, I don't know if they do that, you know, when you go through the process, if Lockheed will look at that. I don't think they do.
Like the HR part of the Lockheed system.
Yeah, I don't think they do. I certainly don't, and I won't. Now that's in the corporate world. If I'm back in government, you know, where I was a political appointee, you know, the White House political affairs office does all that. You don't even get through without them doing all those types of things. So that's already done. Mm-hmm. So, and that's regardless. I mean, I served in the Bush administration, the Obama administration, and so that's just table stakes. So I don't look at that stuff, to be quite frank. I think people, though, need to be responsible. If they actually expect to have a successful career, those things you got to be mindful of what you're posting and things like that, and what you're doing on social media, just as a general rule for a professional. So
okay, fair enough. So definitely, Catherine, did you want to ask anything else about cover letters and resumes before we move on?
I have one question.
Okay.
And that had to do with, you mentioned that there would be resumes that wouldn't get to you for particular reasons. Do you have manual screeners who are looking at your resumes and cover letters, or do you use any automation? And how involved are you with identifying the keywords that your screeners develop?
So at Lockheed, it's all done manually. So you apply for the job, and they go through. My hiring manager will go through. Not my hiring manager. My business partner will go through. My HR business partner will go through and sift out things that just don't come close to meeting what we're looking for. And then usually I'll get, depending on how many applicants, I'll get a sizable number to look at, and then from there, I'll read the resumes. And you know, again, it's one of those things, you know, you look at the resumes, and, you know, certain things will look, you know, you'll look for certain things, and you're focused on kind of a different experience depending on what you're hiring for. So for junior level, you're really looking at what they do in college, and I don't care where they went to school. And you're looking at things like, what was your GPA, and just something, and then, you know, obviously, and again, back to the teamwork thing, and that's kind of the main thing I look for, is kind of were they in some kind of, you know, activity or something that required them to be working with others. So that's kind of how the process works. And I sift through those pretty quick. And then I come down to maybe like 5 or 6, and I'll do a phone interview first. I want to talk to them. And then from there, I'll neck it down to like 3. Mm-hmm. And then the 3 will come in for, well, we used to have in-person interviews. I just hired a person. I felt bad for her. We did the whole process online, over the phone, on Skype, and she's been onboarded. I've yet to meet her in person, and she's my assistant. So you're talking about something a little bit more personal. She's fantastic. I mean, it was a great hire. But, you know, as a class kid, you know, looked at her resume, you know, talked to her. She stood out. Just had some good experiences I thought would be useful. Some good internships that kind of lent itself. When I talked to her, she shared with me, you know, she, you know, played different sports. She was in different activities. Just kind of, it made sense to me.
Great. We do have a question from one of our viewers. While looking for job opportunities, how much of a match in preferred qualifications should we look for instance? So I'm guessing perhaps if this is a new graduate, if we match just a few, is it still okay to apply?
Absolutely. Because, you know, you know, having written those position descriptions and edited them, I mean, can't tell you I've done. You know, you write them. There's a lot of things you gotta do. There's a lot of things you gotta put in there because the legal folks, the HR folks tell you have to do it. But really, I always look for is, you know, like I'll give you, for instance, I hired, this was in the government context. I was hiring when I was chief of staff at DHS. I needed to hire a White House fellow. I need to pick a White House fellow, and this is the cream of the crop. There's 15 people in this program every year, all highly accomplished, all do their things. And we had people who would have whose experiences matched perfectly with DHS and could have helped us. I picked a doctor. I picked an Army doctor who had no background in DHS because she was, when I interviewed her and when I talked to her, I knew she just can get stuff done. If I knew I can rely on her and things. And so I would never have done that if I just had looked at resumes. So my point there is that you should always try. If you think it's something that interests you, chances are, you know, you could be interesting to them. And so don't ever, just because you know, you don't meet, now you may get kicked out of the automated process, and that's the government's USA Jobs does that, and that it's awful. But you know, I just try. If you like it, if it's something you're interested in, you should go after it.
One of our MPP students, Kai Althaus, has a great question here. Following up on what you were just talking about remote interviews, do you feel you can truly get to know an interviewee through the remote process, or do you hope to get back to in-person interviews as soon as possible? I know they're going through a lot of this right now.
Yeah, no, it's always best to get somebody in front of you to lay eyes on them physically. But you know, doing it through Skype or Zoom or whatever platform that the potential employer uses is not a bad alternative. It's not bad. The main things I look for really are, I mean, can you hold a conversation? And you can do that on the phone. You can do that you know, because you'd be shocked, you know, again, you find all the right things in a resume, and then you get the person in front of you and like, I could never have this person work for me. They'd be afraid if I, you know, open up my mouth once, you know, you don't get a feel. So whether, you know, you can hear it in their voice, their confidence, you know, their energy. And so I think all those things, you know, whether you do that by phone, Zoom, or in person, I can honestly, at the end of the day, I always like to see somebody. So, you know, the visual platforms or in person are best. So I wouldn't despair about that. I think that's just going to be the way things are. And quite frankly, we're looking at ways in which we can expedite our hiring process by doing more of this. So even in a post-COVID world, I think the world in general, the corporate world is going to change dramatically, or I should say evolve, continue to evolve in this area. And so, plus it's cheaper for me if you're like in the Midwest to come east. I don't want to get you on a plane and have to pay for it the whole 9 yards. I'd rather I can talk to you by Zoom. Now, I think for a lot of my colleagues and a lot of our leaders, this was a great experience because it's proved to them the value of, yes, people when they work at home, they are working. When we, you know, these platforms do work extremely well. There's nothing like sitting in a conference room and having a, you know, discussion, but these are pretty darn good replacements. And I think I can tell you from like our perspective, a lot of our leaders have kind of figured it out. Like, you know, we've demystified it, as I call it, when I talk to my colleagues. You know, all your old school views of the world when it comes to this stuff have been kind of overridden in many respects, and it's making my life easier because I don't have to be the outlier constantly, you know, talking about the virtues of letting people work where they want to work, and you know, you don't need to be in the office unless I need you to.
It probably also gives you the opportunity to perhaps open you up to interviewing more candidates potentially, rather than maybe cutting out some of those that were you know, you would have liked to have interviewed, or if you had been given the chance, but maybe not been able to bring so many
Yeah,
people in?
possibly, yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
when you're in the physical, there's a finite time, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got basically between, I mean, what's acceptable is between like 8 and 5 or 6, you know. When
Mm-hmm.
you're in the virtual world, you know, you can pick up the phone and talk to anybody anytime.
Okay.
You know, you can do interviews at 7:30 at night or 8 o'clock, whereas before you couldn't. So possibly my day's more filled today, you know, now than it's ever been because of people feel like they can schedule meetings with me now anytime.
For sure.
And that's a maturity issue. I always talk about with not only our organization but across our company. I
Mm-hmm.
think we're finding that out across. My brother, who works for a big pharmaceutical company, has a similar experience. There's a maturity aspect to that people will eventually settle into and respect more of people's individual time. I was fortunate. I worked for a company prior to coming to Lockheed that we were a very successful IT company that we eventually sold, but this was our lifestyle. This is how we manage things. And we didn't have everybody in the office. In fact, most of our leadership team was out of the office all the time, and we did meetings virtually. And so I got accustomed to that. Coming from government, it was a culture shock, but I figured it out and I learned it. My colleagues now are trying to figure it out too. So.
Great. I want to go back to some more of what we were talking about some of the things you look for in a candidate, about making a first impression and things like that, no matter whether it's a phone interview, virtual interview, or face-to-face. But we do have a question from Rochelle about resumes, and specifically about applying for a federal position. So being a federal employee and the resume being short of 15 pages, how do you suggest minimizing a federal resume to 1 to 2 pages?
Well, I'll say the corporate world versus the private sector versus the public sector, they're two different processes.
Mm-hmm.
And what you do for one, you can't do for the other, and vice versa. And there's different aspects. If you don't do every single thing that they ask you to do, your resume gets rejected. So whatever it takes. So disregard my 2-page, you know, limit. That's for the private sector. For the public sector, you got to do whatever you got to do. USA Jobs and those processes are a bit arcane, but they make you fill out all these different things. And if you don't do one thing, they will kick you out of the system. So by all means, follow whatever they tell you to do to the letter of whatever it is. And don't worry about the size.
Great. Okay,
Yeah.
good to know, because we have a lot of students who will be applying to those types of positions. Okay, good. So we did talk about some of the things that, you know, you're looking for when, especially in a virtual interview, being able to hold that conversation, making sure that you have that rapport down. What are some of the things that you look for before the interview even begins, you know, especially in maybe an in-person interview, you know, before you even get in the room with the candidate? You know, what are some of those things? Is it, you know, how they interact with people as they're coming into the building? Do you find out that kind of information?
I usually, so my assistant, who usually has to bring you up and get you through security, she'll give me a little heads up, like, oh, this person, you know. So you be careful what you say to the person who meets you, and and I will say that goes for both government and the private sector. You know, in the government context, usually the people that were brought to me were, you know, so whether it's hiring politicals, I was not as involved in hiring the civilian side, although I sat on a number of panels for that, and those were people who made it through a whole process, and then you sit on a hiring panel. But with the political appointees, you know, you have a White House liaison who kind of manages the process, and they will give you, they will kind of meet with you ahead of time and kind of then give me kind of a heads up. But always be careful what you say, you know, when you're with whoever it is before you have your interview, you know, and how you present yourself and all, because all that gets to the person interviewing you at some point. It just does. And it's just human nature. There's a lot of things to the interviewing process that, as much as you try to take out all the kind of human aspects, they all come in some form or another. And once somebody tells you can't, it's tough to break free of it. So at any rate, just be mindful of that.
Okay.
Not a big thing, but it's something to be mindful of.
Okay. All right. And Rochelle has another question. If she were to apply to the private sector, how would you suggest taking the resume down to the 1 to 2 pages? She's currently a federal employee and thinking of applying to the private sector.
So the best thing is to be short, concise, and to the point. Whatever your relevant experiences are, put those front and center and make sure those carry the most weight. Take out any of the extra, the stuff that just really, what you did in high school or whatever, and even things you did in college that really don't matter. Take those out. And so just be tight with the words, have nice, crisp sentences, format it properly with I like to read bullets. I don't like to read paragraphs. It's just kind of the way I think. Even though I'm a lawyer, I don't like reading paragraphs. But bullets, just kind of tell me what I need to know. Boom, and that's what you want in a corporate resume, because it's not that they don't have the time. I mean, the hiring processes are different but similar in some respects. But it's just in the corporate world, they're just it's a much more matter of fact kind of thing. They have less constraints on them than if you will, than in the government side. So just be to the point.
And that cover letter is also.
Yeah, and the cover letter, they'll give you a good opportunity to kind of demonstrate that again in the cover letter.
Yeah, to highlight really what is in the job description matches your experience, correct?
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about, building that rapport. For you, aside from that, what helps a candidate stand out in an interview with you? What really makes that difference?
There's a couple things, and I'm embarrassed to say, but there are definitely a couple things. When you get a handshake, I don't care if you're a female or male, it doesn't matter. You should always shake the person's hand who you're meeting with. And if you don't, now I know in the COVID environment, I don't know what you do. You still should offer your hand out or offer your fist out or something. Yeah. Definitely. You want to kind of, and then if you have the opportunity to do a handshake, make it a real handshake. When you touch somebody's hand and it's kind of just like no feeling in it, it's just one of those little things, right? So that's kind of sets the scene. How you look and how you present yourself is fundamental. I don't care what you do when you're outside at home. I don't care what you wear, but when you come to a job interview, you better, look the part. And that's the easiest thing you can do. It's Joe used to always tell us, I want you guys to be clean cut. You got to look the part, and you got to act the part too, but you got to look the part first. Okay. Because there's an effect that has. And so clean cut, make sure you shave or whatever it is that you got to do, but just look the part. I don't care if you have tattoos or whatever. That makes no difference to me. Older folks, there's definitely a cultural barrier there. So present yourself in the best way you can. You're putting your best foot forward, and whatever means you have, do it in the best way you can. And understanding that not everybody, has the Brooks Brothers suit or for men or women or whatever, hanging on the shelf, or you can afford to buy that, but just try to do your best. And I think then engaging in a conversation, don't go right into who you are, but you should learn something about the person who you're meeting with. Nowadays, you can pretty much, if you Googled my name, you can find all kinds of things, some true, some not, but you'll find a lot of stuff about me. At the very least, you'll find out that I went to Penn State. I mean, I think that's all over, right? So, try to figure out what is that one thing that I can make a personal connection with, and hope that the other person the person you're interviewing with is personal enough to kind of then engage you. Now, there are people who it's been my experience that just, are tough personalities. That should tell you something in and of itself, especially if that's somebody you're going to work for. But try to figure out what that thing is that you can start a conversation not related to the job, where somebody's from, you know, their hometown, where they went to school, you know, fraternity, whatever it is, something you can find some commonality with to get the conversation going. Because to me, I like to have a conversation with the individual. I'm not there to ask them questions. I want to talk to them, and I want them to talk back. And I don't want them just to give me one word answers either. I want them to be conversant with me as much as me with them. And then it's about, you know, to me, a key thing is like, I will work hard. I've done this, you know, and then you probably got like, you know, 15 minutes or 10 minutes to make your case. So you better practice it ahead of time, like you're given an opening statement. You know, don't make it too candid. It's got to be, again, conversational, but you want to be impactful about who you are, what you do, and what you can do to make my job easier, because I'm taking a chance on hiring you. Why should I hire you? And I think those are just some kind of key things. But I'll tell you, I've had people come in like all disheveled and all. Like, listen, I'm a highly organized person, and I have highly organized people working for me because we got a lot of stuff going on. And if I see somebody that's kind of like all over the place, like, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
You know, you really got to overcome that one. Some of the other things you really got to overcome. So it's easy to do, make it work. These are simple things you can do.
You know, it's interesting listening to you, Christian, because so much of what you're touching on addresses culture in an organization. So I've heard you talk about teamwork and being put together, and some of the things that are instant turn-offs for you as well as turn-ons. How do you figure out if someone's a good fit for your culture in that interview process? What are some of the characteristics or skills or questions that you might ask that help to make that determination? Because as you've said, skills are great, but if it doesn't feel right, how do you make sure it feels right?
So a lot of it has to do with just having the conversation. For a person to be able to carry a conversation on with this person they've never met before, I think is telling. And if you can engage in that conversation, and I think that in and of itself is a tell to me that you can carry that conversation, and that you kind of learned a little bit about the organization. You're never going to know everything about, you know, who we are, whether it's in the government side or the private sector, but you've done a little homework, and then in that you've kind of understand to a certain extent, you know, what it is that we do and how you think you can contribute. Those are some of the things that I think really will then engender additional questions. And I always like to shock folks, not shock them, but I always tell them up front, you know, this is the way it is here. This is the way we run things. And so if you don't think you fit into that, you know, I always say, you don't think you fit into that, then this is not the right place for you. You know, so tell me why you should, you know, tell me what you think about that. And so I'll put it to them. I'll tell them how we run our team, my leadership style, you know, and what I expect. And then ask them, like, is that something that you think you can do? And tell me why. And that is very telling. That's kind of the pivotal moment of whether or not, you know, you get put in the right pile or not. And most people aren't going to be that direct with you. They're, you know, most people will kind of look for all the little signals and they'll be maybe a bit more coy. I think when you have that situation where someone's not as upfront with you, you need to take the initiative and tell them why you think you fit within that culture, why you think you can be a good, you know, asset to the team. So you gotta look at you gotta feel the person out immediately, and then, you know, pivot based on the individuals interviewing you. And it takes a little bit of emotional intelligence, kind of figure that out. And, you know, but you got to adapt quickly, because you can't treat the interview the same no matter who you're interviewing with. You know, you're going to have to adapt and overcome. Some are going to be easier than others to interview with. I think I'm a pretty good person to interview with, unless you just can't hold a conversation, then it's a quick interview. Well, I've had those. I'm like, wow, this person is awesome, top of the list, blah, blah, blah. They come in and you're just like, Okay. Well, listen, I'm glad we had the chance to meet and look forward to talking to you again. So,
Yeah, that's when it's
and
painful.
yeah, and ask questions. Ask questions. You got to ask questions. For folks who don't ask questions, that to me is just unacceptable.
Okay, so
Ask
that
me a
was,
question. Yeah, ask me a question about my personal life. I don't care what you ask me. Just ask me a
well,
question.
now that you're speaking about this, the final wrap up of every interview is, what questions do you have for me or us?
Mhm.
So, what do you like to hear from a candidate that is having a good interview with you? What's something that you really nails it for you with that interview?
So I what I'm asking, like, so what, if I were to get this, what's your level of expectation in terms of um, just work schedule? How are things, ask me about how do things operate? How are we viewed within the larger corporation? Ask me questions about the company itself. How do you see the financial success of the company in the future? Um, you know, if I'm successful in getting this job, are there potential growth opportunities in the future? To give an indication like you care, and you want to learn something about the company that you may have read, you may already know, but ask the question anyway. Ask about, so what was it like playing for, Penn State? Or, hey, you were a political science major, that kind of, you can get something personal, but always ask something. I think it's more of, it all depends. I think what I don't like is, okay, so when can I hear back from you? Or when I expect to hear back from you? Because that's kind of that's my line. That's how I close it. So that's for me to talk about, not you.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Yeah, because that's a given. Okay. We want to remind everybody that we are waiting for your questions. This is a great opportunity to ask questions for Christian questions about his feedback from the hiring and recruitment perspective. But we also want to talk about following up after the interview, which is always, I always have some questions about that process. It's always something that it's hard to navigate. How important, for one, is the follow-up after the interview, Christian?
It's not important to me at all.
Really?
I do it as a matter of course, because just out of respect for the individual. Thanks for taking short email. Thanks for taking the time. Look forward to hearing back from you, whatever. But once I've finished the interview and I get back into the daily work schedule, whatever, I'll look at the email and it's like, okay, thank you. It doesn't really matter to me, honestly.
Okay.
And that's just me. So yeah,
Everybody's different. Yeah.
Everybody's different. It's no harm in it. There's no harm in it at all. I don't think it's critical though. You're not going to not get the job because you didn't follow up with me.
What about checking in? Don't just harass. I heard you start it. I heard you start don't harass you.
Yeah, don't. Once we're done, it usually is out of my hands at that point. I'll turn it over to HR, and then there's just kind of the background. So in the government side, you won't hear back for a long while. I mean, that's just their process, right? So it takes forever, and it's frustrating as hell.
What's forever? Just so our students know, because a lot of them could be applying for this. I mean, I know it varies.
Yeah, if it does vary, but if you're interviewing for a career civilian job, it could take weeks, months, times.
Okay.
It really all depends on every department and agency is different. They have different needs, etc. There's funding issues associated with it. There's a lot of things behind the scenes. In the corporate world, we won't interview somebody unless we have the job's open, it's funded, it's ready to go. And the same, I'm not saying that they do that in the government side. It's just there's a lot more that can go wrong on the government side than in the private sector. Now, is it like if you're applying for like a political appointee job and you're kind of in that mix, they usually let you know within a day or two, sometimes even
Okay.
that day. But typically what we do is, I don't want to hear, I don't want you to ask me. You have an HR business partner that was your primary point of contact. You got to talk to them. And there could be any number of circumstances of why we haven't gotten back to you. Because we're still interviewing somebody, or we're working up the offer letter, depending on the level of position. It may need to go through other wickets to get the final approval, and it's the approval, not that I'm hiring you per se, but it just got to get our different approvals. And every corporation has different processes. Sometimes some are faster, some are slower, and you just got to be patient. But check in with that HR business partner, whoever your initial your recruiter or whomever, they should be straight with you.
Okay, great to know. We have a question here. I'm a graduate student in chemical engineering, and as I'm applying for jobs, I come across so many qualification requirements that I have to customize my resume and cover letter for every job I apply to every time. This is an excruciating process, and I have a huge barrier to do this every time. Do you have any tips on making the whole process easier and keep track of where I applied and current status, etc.?
I don't. I'm sorry. That's a tough one to square. I can tell you, like in my younger day, you would have to just, if you were applying for a job, that was a little bit different than what you did, but you had the experience, you got to write the cover letter different. You got to emphasize different things. And I know that's a painful experience, but you want to put your best foot forward. You don't want to put the same one because it won't be read the same. Won't be, so you're going to just have to do sorry, there's no way to square that one. You're going to have to curtail it and do what you need to do to fit that job description.
Right.
Yeah, it stinks.
Yeah, it is a hard process, but it's worth it in the end. When you get that job.
If you want the job, you'll do what you need to do. I hate to be so cool, so crass about it, but that's just, not all jobs are the same.
I know. Yeah. Here's another one. How often do you read cover letters? I've heard some don't pay attention. We talked about that a little earlier. I've heard some don't pay attention to them. Second question, how much time do you typically spend reviewing each resume? And what's your favorite source for best candidates? LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, etc.
So I'll take the first one. I'll take the last one first. I don't do the sourcing. That's our HR folks. Typically, I do. What I'd like though is word of mouth. I'll ask all my colleagues, hey, you got anybody Those are typically the ones that have become top of the list. And I'll look for them when they apply and make sure that they get an interview right away. So networking is so critical. So that's the first thing. I spend a fair amount of time. I'll look at the resumes, and then as they get, so I look at the resumes and then I'll go to the cover letter. I won't read the cover letter first. I'll look at the resume. If the resume kind of, the cover letter is then the next step. The cover letter is kind of the differentiator between resumes, not the other way around. Because you got to have, certain criteria, you're looking for certain things, and the cover letter is good kind of telling your story, but I can only read your story after I kind of see you meet kind of the basics. And so that's kind of the way I do it. And I'll spend as much time as I need to. I'm a speed reader. I just picked up this skill. And so I go through things pretty quick. I'm looking for, depending on what I'm hiring for, I'm looking for, kind of the right things, and certain experiences, while they may look the same, or, having some experience of my own now, know that they're not the same. And so I can sift through things fairly quickly. But I like reading the cover letters though, because I'm hopeful that I'm going to learn something about you that's going to make me then bring you in for an interview, or at least talk to you.
Okay. Speaking of networking, this is especially overwhelming for those who are applying in their first job, this whole process, or their first internship. We wanted to talk a little bit, as we don't have a lot of time left, but, I know we have a couple of questions, right, Catherine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. How do you suggest students or recent graduates start making some connections to build their career network? You know, they know professors and maybe they've met some people that have come in to speak in their classes. But what do you suggest is some of the best ways for them to begin networking as they start that search?
So you got to start from like ground zero, like, and you just keep on building. And the way you do it is, especially coming out of college, you're not going to have a big network, certainly not a professional network. So if you intern someplace, you better have minded those relationships and kept those fresh. And so that's a place to start. Professors, that's a place to start. You need one person to start with, really. And it's like a domino, and it kind of just kind of goes from there. So you got to get, who are those people? So that's why it's critical to have those kind of experiences, internship experiences, because quite frankly, you're not going to do anything like terribly meaningful in an internship. I'm sorry, you're doing it because you're trying to build the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to, in the field that you want to go. Yeah, you may want to get a feel for, is this where I want to go? But once you're past that, the intern's not going to be doing anything, strategic, right? You're going to see that, kind of. But the key thing about what I tell our folks when I bring in interns is use this opportunity to get to know everybody around here and then build those relationships. I mentor a student this past year at Penn State, as I do every year in the political science department. And she took advantage of all of the relationships. And, now she's got people helping her beyond just me. She's got a lot of people helping her with, potential opportunities in the government. And, oh yeah, I know this person, let me make a phone call, that kind of thing. That's what you need. You need to get it snowballing. You need to get it moving. And the only way you get it moving is you got to take advantage of those situations. But it really just literally starts with one person. And you got to follow through. So even if someone doesn't respond to you initially, follow up with them. And keep you got to continually follow up. And then over time, it just will start to grow. But you got to start someplace. And it seems daunting at first, particularly in this environment. It is tough. I say it's tough. But also people are more accessible, though. So with the bad side comes the good side. So people are more accessible. They're more apt to respond to you quicker because they're not in the office. They're not driving to and from work or whatever. They don't have as many distractions per se. And so, that's the way you got to do it. And, someone comes into, the program that speaks, follow up with them, go see them after class, ask them questions and start to build a rapport. If it's someone who interests you. A lot of students have done that with me at Penn State, and I've gotten them internships at DOD. I've gotten them internships at DHS. I had one kid who was I had one gentleman who interned for us, and we eventually hired him. So it's really just a matter of you got to just stick with it. It just takes a certain amount of kind of tenacity, and it may be a pain at first, and but for folks like me who've kind of been in that situation, I get it. So when someone, is like kind of borderline harassing me, I'll take the time. I'll go and talk to them. And I understand. I've been there, I've been in that situation.
So how helpful have you found the Penn State Alumni Network to be in that process? The largest network in the world, I believe.
It's like Penn Staters are omnipresent. Now, I got to say, I had a distinct advantage because I played football at Penn State. So it didn't matter if you went to Penn State or you knew who Joe Paterno was, you had a high opinion, you still do. I mean, I've yet to come across one person who had something negative to say about the man, primarily because they're probably afraid of me. But seriously, Penn State football carried a tremendous, for me, it was the door opener, right? And it really helped me, get in the door. Now, it only got me in the door. I had to stay there. And that's the key thing but it was, I used it to my benefit. I used it to my benefit in a positive way. And I hope I've exemplified what Joe has always set out for, success from honor, and kind of demonstrated that. But I use that as a way. Yeah, you want to talk about college football? Let's talk about college football. It's as I was saying, you want to have that conversation. And that was always the initial icebreaker. How you played football for Coach Paterno? What was it like? And that just kind of melted the whole thing and got it off to a really good foot. Didn't mean I was going to get the job, but anyway, it was helpful. So whatever that thing is that you have, you use it. Penn State network is enormously powerful. I've hired now 2 Penn Staters. I love kids come from Penn State. There's something about them, not just because I am one, but I just find that, you know, they're not coming from an Ivy League school. They don't have that chip on their shoulder. They've had a good worldly experience being on that campus with all those people. They know how to carry themselves. My best interns were Penn Staters. And I'm telling you, I'm not just saying that just because I'm a Penn Stater, but, you know, I had kids from, you know, different Ivy League schools and all, and they all thought that, you know, everything was coming to them. The Penn State folks are just more kind of grounded in things. But there's a lot of people out there who want to help you. Trust me, a lot of people.
Well, we're excited to hear that, especially for our students in the School of Public Policy and in the College of the Liberal Arts, and of course, all of our other Penn State students. So Christian, any final words of advice from your perspective in hiring and recruiting?
I just go back to, you know, you got to look the part, act the part. Okay. It's critical. Those kind of interpersonal, those, you know, be able to carry the conversation, you know, take the initiative, you know, give a good, strong handshake. Those are like little things, but then emphasize the things that you've done, that kind of teamwork. You have a strong work ethic. And I think, you know, those will carry you a long way. They'll get you in the mix and certainly get you down into the last 3. Then you got to kind of carry it from there. But just never underestimate those little things. Doing those little things mean all the difference in the world. And so carry your voice, have a strong voice, positive energy goes a heck of a long way. As Joe used to always say, the little things matter, and in this case, the little things do matter. So that's my advice to you. And let me just say, you know, for all of you that are going to go into government, I applaud you. I encourage you. We need more young people, smart people in government. We have a very old workforce. When I say old, they're all graying out. We have, you know, this big bow wave coming through on retirements. There's a great opportunity, but more importantly, you get to serve your country in a way that I think is unique and different. And I just really applaud you for getting this education and having that interest. I've been doing it my whole life, and while I'm in the private sector now, I will go back in a future administration. To me, is the most meaningful things I've done in my life have been in public service. So I just can't say enough about it.
Well, we appreciate all this great advice that you've provided for us today and to our students. And we thank you for joining us today, Christian. And we thank our attendees for all these great questions as well. We hope you'll join us on Wednesday, October 21st at 11:30 a.m. when we talk about navigating organizational change. You can watch past events from this and other series from the School of Public Policy at publicpolicy.psu.edu. Christian Marrone, thank you so much again for being with us today. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. And anything I can do to help my school, I'm there, as I told you. So I wish everybody the best of luck, and especially stay safe in this. Take all the precautions necessary. It's best to stay safe, and go Penn State. So I'm looking forward to the season.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
I'm Whitney Sheridan. I'm Whitney Sheridan with Catherine Baumgardner. For all of us with the School of Public Policy, thanks so much for watching and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.